my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today and the Center for Native American and Indigenous Research Artist-in-Residence, Margaret Pearce. She is Citizen Band Potawatomi and a cartographer, even though that word cartographer doesn't really grasp all of the things that she does and all of the ways that she thinks. Her work focuses on expanding cartographic language for better representations of story, dialogues, place, and indigenous geographies. She's the author of several award-winning maps, and we put them outside in the hallway, just outside this room. So once we've heard the talk, please feel free to go and take a look at them and see them up close. The most recent map that she made is called Coming Home to Indigenous Place Names in Canada. She's recently the recipient of a Landis Research Fund grant for a project titled Mississippi Dialogues, field work for an interdisciplinary cartographic inquiry into the indigenous place worlds of the Mississippi River. This is a project that's working to center indigenous place names as a way of remembering the river, its floods, its shorelines, and its knowledges. During her residence at Northwestern this past month, and will go on for a couple more weeks, she's visited with classes, met with students to hear and advise them on their work. In 2 weeks, she'll facilitate a mapping workshop for participants in a Humanities Without Walls grant on indigenous art and activism in the Mississippi River, so speaking precisely to the terms that Adrienne is using. Her talk today is titled, One Place Because of Another, Mapping Indigenous Geographies. Please join me in extending a warm welcome.
Gotta get out of PowerPoint. Paguni kanes, os koindesh pas, Lugoi wani ja, Kondodum, Kaston Sharakon Doshpia, Kadawam Peg Edayan. I'm Margaret Pearce, Citizen Band Potawatomi. Bear Clan. I grew up in a place called At the Waterfall, Rochester, New York. I've never said that place name in public. It really feels good. And I came here from a place called the Great Landing Place, Rockland, Maine. I'm grateful to my ancestors and our cousins, Anishinabek, Mino Odawa, and our friends, Miamia people, Ho-Chunk people, Menominee people, for hosting us on these lands and waters and taking such good care of them for so long that we may all enjoy them today as guests and know that we will continue to care for them for the next generations. Iguian, my heartfelt thanks to my hosts here at CNAIR. The snare. Kelly Wisecup, Patty Lowe, Jennifer Michaels, and Pam Silas. Where's Pam? Oh. All of whom put endless logistics together to make my visit comfortable and shower me with opportunities since I've been here. Please join me in honoring the incredible team of CNAIR. And also in my precious days here, I've had the pleasure of getting to meet students of NACE, and I had a great time at Birds and Breakfast last week. So it's great experiencing indigeneity at Northwestern, and I'm really excited to be part of your first of many annual research symposiums here. So many more to come. So my title is an intentional twist on Yuan Kwan's One Place After Another. And that's just about as far as I'm going to take that, but I've always wanted to twist it into One Place Because of Another as a playful way of pointing to the fact that Indigenous studies is also all about site-specific art in a different way. That's a great conversation if any of you want to, it's probably already a thesis, but I haven't read it. But I always wanted to do that. And I also wanted an excuse to put up this Thomas Taskett sculpture that's in the Hudson River Valley that I love because when I look at it, I think indigenous place names. It just speaks to me in the landscape the way a place name does. And I think that's really cool. So there's very little theory ahead because it's too late in the day. But if you want theory, I brought some theory, so theory. And we're just going to wave to it as we go by. Because I'm not your theorist in residence, I'm your artist in residence. And I'm going to take license with that title. So I'd like to use my time instead to meditate on places. We've been talking a little bit about place today, sometimes theoretically, sometimes in action. Places as process, to explore the active role that places take in our work, the way places generate our creative practices, the way they work on us, and the way they give us language to talk about them in the form of place names. And in the discursive placement framework within which they reside. I'm guessing that the agency of places in research is a widely shared experience in this room. So I'm going to show you a few projects where that's been true for me and then turn it over to you for your stories. So in this talk, you're also going to hear me speak about cartography as language. And I mean that literally, not metaphorically. I practice cartography as a structural language, built of meaningful words, phrases, and grammars, and I'd love to talk about that, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So it was when I was living in Kansas that I was invited to come out to this place, Indian Island, to collaborate with Penobscot Cultural and Historic Preservation on a new place names map for their traditional territory, which occupies about 2/3 of what has been recently renamed the state of Maine. This map is out in the hallway if you want to look at it. So we wanted to do this place names project together. We looked for funding and we got it, and then I moved out there in the summertime. The purpose of the map was to support language revitalization in a community where most people don't speak the language or grow up with the traditional place names, to inspire the next generation of speakers, and to communicate the presence and meaning of Penobscot traditional territory to outsiders, including tourists in Maine. The map we ended up making has Penobscot names on one side and English translations on the other side, and then it connects them with a gazetteer. Indigenous place names, this is where I live, as many of you know, are not simply a collection of locations with descriptive names. They're a mode of mapping specific to indigenous peoples and other oral societies, a form of cartography created by the intersection or the interaction of place name, travel route, story, and the traveler themselves, the person who contributes the last piece and activates the map. Place names form a web in the landscape designed to be memorizable and memorable, a system traditionally taught to children through stories and repetition for them to then use as a map to navigate even in unfamiliar landscapes and plan their seasonal rounds. They're not themselves the places, or place worlds as they've been called, and I've been thrilled to hear you all speak of today. They're the anchors for the images of places we carry inside ourselves. In our project, the names didn't go into the map all at once from some pretty spreadsheet. They came from here, which when I first saw it, I thought, oh my God, this project is never going to end. They came from here. And they came from here. And then the language keepers worked on them. Some needed a small spelling adjustment or a better translation, but many more of the names were puzzles for us to solve. So this text is by Fanny Hardy Extorm, and those of you who work on place names research or any is familiar across Indigenous studies, that there's books that are well, sort of true, like near to the truth, and then there's books that are really, really far away from the truth, so you just try to like keep close the ones that are near. And so Fanny, as we affectionately call her, Fanny's work is the nearest, so she's the go-to source. So just like in a cardboard puzzle, those of you who like to do puzzles, we figured them out one by one, and as we did, the shape changed, just like in a puzzle, and the names that were solid helped narrow down the locations and meanings of those names that were shaky. So one day, Carol and I drove down to Searsport on the west side of the bay to try and figure out Wisecup, which is how Mainers say is the Indian name of Sears Island, which is the island that has no word on it there, that has like a little causeway. That's a human-made causeway that didn't used to exist. So that is called by many people Wisecup. But Fanny wrote it as Wisecup, and she doubted it was on Sears Island. So we went looking for it, and her corrected pronunciation pointed the language speakers to a corrected spelling, Wasawampi, at the Shining Sands. And they also agreed it was unlikely that this name referred to the whole of Sears Island, which is a rocky outcrop. But we did have clues around there. So we had Essek, Clan Place. We had Winnakanasek, Short Carry. And we had Aquahasotek. My Penobscot is very poor. Forgive me. Stepping Ashore Place. So Carol and I first walked all around Sears Island thinking maybe we'll encounter some sand, any sand somewhere, and which we did not. There's no sand there, just a steep rocky shore. So then we hung around at Essek and gathered clams as the name instructed us to do. So that name was good. There's clams. We did not see any shiny sand. Then we drove around to Aquahasotek, clearly a stepping ashore place, as its name testifies, a very rare sandy point in the bay. There's no other place like this around there. But it was not shiny. So then we went back to Essek and hung around, walking and looking at the sand. And then Carol looked across the cove and she said, with characteristic understatement, if it had been me, I would have been like, but she's very understated in her manner, and she said, well, there's the shining sand. And so we realized that we had found the vantage point, standing where the ancestors stood, seeing what they saw when they made the place name, not on Sears Island, but at Sears Island. One place because of another, activated by visiting. Later, when I added canoe routes to the map, we saw more clearly how the place name was a trail marker for the route up the west shore of the bay. The Penobscot world is crisscrossed by the stories of their hero Gluskabe, who pulled the first moose from the earth, taught Penobscot people how to do all the things they would need to survive, and had a lot of exciting adventures, some of which created landforms. Two of these stories are in the map. I could have included them as side panels, as informational text elsewhere in the layout, but they declined to be represented this way, instead asserting themselves directly in the map and weaving themselves into the place names. So here's the Penobscot side, and here's the English side. So reading at Moosehead Lake, Gluskabe, his adventure is in green. He's chasing a moose calf from the west to east. The calf knocks over Gluskabe's cattle, which you can see if you look up from the north arrow, the Kettle Mountain. The calf knocks over Gluskabe's cattle, and then Gluskabe throws down his pack. The story makes the places, and the sequence tells us the direction that we're facing when we're paddling by in the canoe. You can see that red canoe route on the south. Gluskabe threw down his pack east. The calf knocked over his cattle to the west of there. we know where we are locally. Other place names remind us to pay attention to the story. So there's Kettle Mountain Lake, just south of the Kettle, and then east of there and south is Kettle Mountain Pond next to the Kettle, and then Kettle Mountain Lake in that southeast corner. Later, Guscave is still chasing that same calf down by the bay, 120 miles south at the mouth of the river. So here he is coming down the bay on the English side. He kills the calf. I'm going to just stand over here, it's much easier. So when the calf gets to the bay, he goes swimming across. There's our shining sands. Guscave leaps across at the landing place, kills the calf, and then he throws the entrails into the bay to make this landform. And the story says, you can see the white entrails when you are paddling by. So it's telling us the vantage point, so we can find the portage through, that's at what's known as Islesboro. And where he threw the liver is the color of liver. Here's the liver, this tiny place. So why do we care about that liver? Well, that liver, if you look, you can see a canoe route just to the north of there. So if you want to find the trailhead to that inland route, you have to be at the liver in order to get the sight line. Otherwise, it's totally not visible from the shore. So the story makes one puzzle piece at a time, forming the space where the next puzzle piece can go. Oops, there's our. So the agency of places is maybe not so hard to understand if you consider the agency with which some novelists describe their characters, how characters tell them what to do. It's not the same, but it's a useful analogy. In a 2017 article for the Canadian Historical Review, Brenda McDougall reflected on the way settler scholars write Indigenous history, where the land is the setting, and Indigenous ways of writing history, where the land is an historical actor, where the land is the character, not the setting. At Indian Island, places generated our artistic process as puzzle pieces in the making of the map, and asserted themselves as puzzle pieces for the map reader and canoe traveler to assemble themselves from the story. Place names give us ways to pick them up. They are the language we need to arrange them in our minds. Like a stepping stone which once reached reveals the location of the next stone, one project finished makes the next one visible. We see with new eyes from a new vantage point because of lessons we've learned, skills that have come our way, and the unresolved feelings or ideas we feel obligated to work on. When our map was done, the places were still speaking to us, telling us what to work on next. Very bossy. That led to a new project to develop a plan for Penobscot language signage on the University of Maine campus, which is built on unceded Penobscot territory. One sign went up in February at Corwin Hall because that is where Native American Programs is. That was the place at the beginning. And about half of the remaining signs, I am thrilled to tell you will be installed later this month. Another small step in gradual public education about Penobscot homelands. So coming soon to Northwestern. Right on. It was really fun to do this plan, and I'd be happy to talk more about that. So it also led to a commission for me from the University of Maine to develop a map in response to Canada 150, the anniversary of Canadian Confederation and celebration of its sovereignty. So as you know, Canada 150 was not a celebration for Indigenous people. This is a Reuters photograph from Unsettled Canada Day in 2017. The anniversary continued the genocide enacted against Indigenous people from first contact to the present day, yet another sweeping aside of their sovereignties, protocols, and rights and another failure to address the human rights abuses that continue today. So Canada is ostensibly undergoing a truth and reconciliation process. Canada 150 undermined those actions and commitments by celebrating the sovereignty that enacted the genocide the TRC is meant to address. So it was very frustrating. Traditional place names are central to the articulation of indigenous sovereignties because they encode rights, obligations, and ancient connections between communities and places. So the map, we thought, should be a map of Canada, entirely in indigenous place names. The resulting map, it's also in the hall, was 8 months of full-time work for me, mercifully spread across 16 months. I really needed those breaks. It portrays the names of not one nation, but hundreds of nations and communities. I wasn't able to move in with everyone, as I had at Indian Island, unfortunately, though I did visit 3 places while making the map. But I was able to listen to people talk about their places on the phone and an email and hear how they spoke about them and what the names themselves say in translation. All names are in by permission, peer-reviewed by their speakers and caretakers. I didn't want to make yet another map that said, here's what white academics say are your names. Instead, I wanted to say, these are the names that you said would be okay to say if we spelled them like this and if we translated them like this. The permissions encircle the map in a larger type size than the names themselves, positioned by the 4 directions to emphasize that they are the sources and that they too are site-specific. These names were also puzzle pieces added to the map one permission at a time. This is what that looks like. About half the time people said no. This is what that feels like. Some days all I did was ask permission all day. Like I would just ask permission and nothing would happen. And that, 8 hours and I would come home and I was like, can't do it again. And then I would get up and do it again, and then the same thing happened. If they said yes, we began a process together, adding names, making revisions, and trading screenshots back and forth until the revised screenshot was acceptable. These are Tahltan place names. And many times I had a mediator, so I was working with a woman, an academic, who was like a mediator with Tahltan Nation. From that approved place, that stepping stone, I could extend outward, ask their neighbor if they too would contribute some names, hope that they said yes to, if not that month, then maybe next month, or maybe next year. These are Casca Dene names that join the Tahltan names. And I'm also showing you the larger space so you can see how they go in, how they went in patch by patch. So at first glance, the map resembles a conventionally non-Indigenous map of Canada, which is my intentional design. But when you begin to read, you'll find that there's a web of strong current of obligation running between those marks. The names are connected with contemporary highways, roads, ferries, and snowmobile routes, indicating the map takes place in the present. Now that we know how to get there, we can imagine those possible experiences we're obligated to visit. The roads also give readers comfortable footing in an otherwise unfamiliar world, since everybody has their favorite roads and highways, and to gaze at a highway map always brings back memories of favorite travels and reawakens our intentions for future trips. This is kind of a widening theme in my work, is to build comfortable places into the work and put the hard places in the peripheral vision to lure people in, and then those hard pieces are also present. The title and epigraph refer to pre-writer Neil MacLeod's idea of coming home, to explain that place names form a map rooted in the past and grounding us in the present, and pointing to our responsibility to find a place for ourselves among those names if we are to go forward together in a better way. As he writes, The process of coming home is an exercise in cartography, not so much returning to some idealized location of interpretation. Rather, it is the attempt to link two disparate narrative locations and to find a place of speaking and narrating, wherein the experiences of the present can be understood as a function of the past. While coming home is a return to indigenous memories and narratives, home has been changed through new layers of experience and new ways of occupying the same space. However, this experience grounded in older memories and older narratives, which serve as a map for people to find. This experience is grounded in older memories, which serves as a map for people to find their way through life. Places form that initial footing that we must find, that vantage point or stepping stone, if we are to perceive that map of marked places that lies before us and around us. And as we already know, the places are telling us they're at the vantage points. This is one of my favorites, kind of right in the middle there. Danat se sa o. There is his head. Like if you just say that, like I can feel my hand coming up and pointing, and like I can feel my body like going to face it. There is his head. Places reject the vague sentimentality that colonizing histories have imposed on them. On the contrary, places tell us they have a logic. So these names are from the GIS department at Anishkawkamik. Is anyone here Cree? That's James Bay Cree, who are the only ones that sent me their place names as shapefiles. So, meaning they gave me points, and those points were like centroids that were right in the middle of their water bodies. So I originally named this pole, so if you see in the middle, Burnt Point Lake, with a circle with it, so I start with the syllabics, and then the Cree, and then the translation in blue, this thing is Burnt Point Lake right here. So this, so my shapefile came in with centroids right in the middle of all these lakes, and this one was not here, it was right there. And so at first I had labeled this whole space Burnt Point Lake, and then I had to shift it over when I realized that their centroids were all really perfect. I shifted over there before I sent them the screenshot. But when the screenshot came back to me in the email, elders had complained about this, about what I had done. That's not the lake, they said. That's not even a lake. It's Hydro-Quebec's flooding of our rivers and lakes together. It has no relationship to other places. It doesn't exist. There is a place called Burnt Point Lake, and they are under there. So I drew in the underwater lake and named them Burnt Point. So in this map, places asserted themselves through people, permissions, and protocol. Each new screenshot proposed the possibility of places to the next community or nation until the map was whole. In his interpretation of Western Apache historical methods, Keith Basso wrote, Western Apache history as practiced by Apaches advances no theories, tests no hypotheses, and offers no general models. What it does instead, and likely has done for centuries, is fashion possible worlds, give them expressive shape, and present them for contemplation as images of the past that can deepen and enlarge awareness of the present. This description of fashioning possible worlds, giving them shape and presenting them for contemplation as images, is exactly my experience when I'm looking for cartographic language to express other people's place names. This map has gone on to be exhibited in Toronto and in Eindhoven, the Netherlands this past month, an indigenous theater production and indigenous animation, and later this year will be installed at the Vancouver Aquarium. In reviews, people have complimented it and said, we need this, and in the same breath, they say, it's not enough, we need more than this. They're right, the map includes many silences. Half of the people said no. We can talk about that as well. Geographies are always changing and growing. And each expression of indigenous geographies in a map provokes a consciousness of all that remains unexpressed. When the map was finished, it was time for me to honor other people's maps. I had the chance to do just that when my friend Eliana and I honored mapping by the Ogama Mikama project, or OMP, in Toronto last July. Does anyone know OMP? Awesome. So OMP is a partially, and as they call themselves, is a partially anonymous collective dedicated to indigenous street interventions in Toronto, including signage with actions to replace both street signs and the dreaded historical plaque. And they're also mapping their clan signatures back onto the land in GPS waypoints. These clan interventions are not arbitrarily placed in a city. They're site-specific, designed to make urban indigenous geographies newly visible to people as they go about their day, to educate and remind them of their responsibilities to those sites. Speaking of indigenous tours. So to honor OMP, we made a public workshop to remap one of the clan signatures that went on the right, the Mikana, the snapping turtle. So we came together as a group of strangers, people who'd seen our invitation posted on Eventbrite. As we walked back the turtle's tail and legs and head and body, the Mikana led us to places. Spring Creek, an ancient spring connected to the underground Laurentian River, a kilometer below us, which flowed beneath the great glaciers in the Ice Age and flows today still, where we sang a water song. We stopped at an imposed formal British garden where we intervened with milkweed seed pods. We stopped at a grove of black oaks, survivors of the incredible black oak savanna, which was built over 4,000 years by indigenous people and used to be all of the western part of Toronto. And we drank sassafras tea together, because that's part of the savanna. And at the turtle's tail, we closed with a retelling of the theft of the land we occupied by the betrayals of Treaty 13. So we originally conceived of this event as honoring indigenous geographies, and our embodied mapping as honoring, but we soon understood that the central actions of honoring the map was about activating the map and about obligation. So I'm going to close with some images from my work in progress. This project was inspired by the Humanities Without Walls collaborative initiative under Kelly Wisecup's direction to investigate indigenous art and activism on the Mississippi River in the context of changing climates. Listening to Kelly and her team talk about the river as indigenous place was an awakening for me and an inspiration to follow their lead. So my intention is to resituate our current debates about Mississippi River flood management, to remove them from a map shaped by human control of nature, and resituate them in spaces shaped by indigenous assumptions about time, space, and human relationships with the more than human world. To achieve that, I'm remapping the river in its 1890s shorelines before the Army Corps got its hands on it. And then into these old shorelines, I'm interweaving indigenous place names and their translations. And then into that indigenous river, I'm adding public testimonies about flooding and flood management. My plan is to present the river in a series of 15-foot sections, about as long as you see me working on a mock-up here, for installation at publicly accessible sites along the river, like parks and libraries. And I'm also making an accompanying guidebook for visitors to connect each panel to the next. So you can see this is kind of my working layout of where all the panels go in that purple outline along the river. Here's a close-up of the Budote panel, the Twin Cities, and that has both Dakota and Anishinaabe names in it. This is what that same panel looks like in QGIS, so it's just kind of a big mess of data right now. And then here's how I'm starting to work with the old 1890s wetlands and river course places as area patterns. And this is nothing like it's going to look like in the end. This is just me making tools for trying to look at what's there. So I don't know where this project will take me or what will happen when I leave here to begin working directly with people on their river names. I'm on this stepping stone looking at a project I don't yet know. I'm still all books and papers and digital files. But I know you, or I and now you know what I'm holding when I stand on this stone. I'm thinking about mapping as activating. I'm thinking about the power of exhibiting a map that's the size of a wall. I'm thinking about the speech of underwater place names. And then since I learned from Eli that you have a fish here that speaks so loudly that you can hear the fish from the speaking outside the pond, that is keeping me awake. And so the place is working on us. So here I've purposely mixed up my way of talking about place and as place worlds formed by lands and waters and their inhabitants, projects as places, community dialogues as places, bodies. They're all coalescences of feeling, spatially situated, that have a shape and that have agency. They assert themselves in our creative practices through permissions, intentions, protocols, and visual vocabularies, be they words, syllabic, or graphic mark. In my experience, there are no boundaries between these manifestations of place, but that doesn't mean that they're vague. On the contrary, they form highly structured networks, and puzzling out those structures is for me an endless source of excitement and wonder. So on my drive here, my closing, I stopped overnight in Maumee, Ohio, and visited the site of the 1794 Battle of Fallen Timbers. Fallen Timbers, as you may know, was a major defeat of the Confederacy of 11 nations, including my nation, who aligned in opposition to U.S. aggression and theft of the lands that became known as the Northwest Territory and led to enormous land losses the following year with the Treaty of Greenville. It was not lost on me that I was driving from Fallen Timbers to Evanston, in my ancestral territory, to be a guest of a university founded to serve the region taken because of what had happened at Fallen Timbers, because of Fallen Timbers, Northwestern. Yet every morning I run on the same shores where my ancestors have always run, and put down my sama where they have always put down their sama, and I listen to what they have to say. Before I came here, I had no vantage point for the Mississippi, but CNAIR made a place for me in my ancestors' old home place, a place of orientation, a place for me to navigate from. So at the end of this month, I may continue west to the Mississippi, as McLeod wrote, grounded in the older memories and the older narratives, which will serve as a map as I listen to what people tell me about their places, the places I know will guide me as they always have. Thank you. So will anyone have, it's 5 o'clock exactly, if we have a moment for people to share stories about the agency of places in their lives. I would love to hear.
Can I ask you a question about what happens when places that carry descriptive names, indigenous descriptive names, suddenly become places that are named after people? I mean, we have Lincoln Wood, Lincoln Center, Lincoln Avenue, Lincoln Park, Lincoln everything here.
Yeah.
And all the names on the maps that you shared with us were very descriptive about activities that happened and experiences that people had. So what happens in that translation? What do we lose?
Oh, we lose the fabric of our memory because we lose, the names become perhaps arbitrary, although I don't really want to generalize too far in that because there are commemorative indigenous place names that there are, I mean, you can have commemorative site specificity, right? So I don't want to generalize too much. I would say we lose that archive of place knowledge, that the descriptions help us remember better. Because the way that place names work, and I have just learned, I mean, I've learned this from reading people write about it and then also experiencing it in collaboration, is that there are these two pieces, the denotative and the connotative. And the denotative is telling you, this is what it looks like, and the connotative is telling you, and then this is what you're supposed to remember to do or how to act there. And the reason for that shape is because you can memorize an entire landscape that you have never been to. So when you see there is his head, you remember, you're like, oh, there's his head. There's the kettle. I'm looking right at it. So I remember what is supposed to happen here. I'm supposed to be getting arrowhead at Keynote while I'm here. I'm supposed to be doing all this other things.
So I really appreciate your picture of on the nose. I think that we've all faced that as we're doing research. And so with the mapping, and you have voids because of these nodes, do you listen to what other tribes are naming those places to fill in the gaps, or do you leave them gaps?
Yeah. So if you can see on the map out there, there's many. Couple large ones, silences. So like the first no I got was, and no, no comes in all different forms. No is a trail of unanswered voicemails for 6 months. No is also no. Like, hi, my name is Margaret, I live in the United States. That's no. So the first like unambiguous no that I got was from Shewepum, who is in the middle of serious litigation with the province of British Columbia. There's no way that they are going to trust Anishinaabe Kwe from the U.S. who they've never met with their names, which is, anything could happen. So, so their territory has no names there. So in the text, and there's other places, some people have no names because they are just too busy. They are also in the middle of doing their names and they don't want any interference while they're working on them. Some people are redoing their names. Yeah, so many different reasons that there's those silences. And an important piece of the map is the sovereign right to not say, to not share. Like, that is sovereignty. That's enacting sovereignty. And the map says these are not all the names. There's thousands and thousands more names, and there are thousands more names, right? And if people want to know more about the names that are in those places, they should really get to know the neighbors.
I had a question. So one entrance I think is just gorgeous, and it was a lovely way to do this, to think about CNAIR, which I've been calling SNAIR, so when I mess up, thinking about SNAIR, how SNAIR might be a source of activation, and as a mission towards activation. I feel like you've just animated the potential of what we are doing here in a nice and new way that just felt really nurturing to me. So thank you for that. And here's my question. So 25 years ago, Oscar Coagli told me that one of the things that we were in the middle of is that our places were changing. The logics of our places, of our homelands were changing, also known as climate change. But he was talking about our lands were changing. And that part of the demand for us learning our languages and returning to our homelands, which I think there's been a nice movement in the Indian country to be reconnected. You mentioned Rand and Len's pedagogy and Leanne's work and Eva's doing this work. I think there's a nice movement happening. So I say that in relation to this question about, did you learn things about making new names from your emerging lands and logics of lands? And how do you think about that?
From my work with people, yeah, well, names are being made all the time. I mean, it's past, present, and future, right? So that's just a really important piece, that names are always and remade and argued about. I'm just trying, so many different pieces. At Kronstadt Nation, for example, where I live, they are really trying to figure out, they're having this conversation about saying goodbye, and that's just starting, and that's like really grueling. It's really grueling. And I don't know how that's going to happen, and they have not begun making new names, and that's, I'm guessing, probably going to come out of those new relationalities and saying goodbye and also saying "Wei Wei," welcome. And then other people, I'm trying to think of this came up in the Canada map. I would say that I don't think I can speak to having an experience of that with people working in the Canada map. And that was more, the conversation was more about the generation gap in traditional place name use, and that being like a really important thing to focus on first. So yes, the climate is changing really fast, especially as you go north, like that whole like everything leaving, and it's the elders who have the syllabics, right? And and they're the ones who know all these all the jokes that are in landscape, because like Inuit words are like all like hilarious and like sexual and like jokes about each other, and so that is like, and the younger people don't like, that's just, so that's first. That's, yeah. Nothing else is coming to mind.
I wanted to accept your invitation to share stories, because I feel like so graciously shared with us. So I'm from Oklahoma, and I grew up in a town called Jay, which was named after like the postmaster's daughter or something, like it was their family name or something. But in Cherokee we call it Plaiko, which is the word for blue jay, which at first I thought was just like it's just like they're the same kind of word, they're related. But then I kind of learned more about how our villages used to be set up, and it was set up a lot more like land-centered villages. And my family's always lived like, before the trail, my mom's family came over before removal, and my dad's family came over during removal. And my mom's family is bird clan, and they've always lived in that area. So I've since started to wonder if maybe Plaiko is referring to like the clans, one of the predominant clans that would have been in that area. So then I grew up there, but then I moved later whenever I entered college to Tahlequah, which is an English way of saying Tahlequah, which is the Cherokee word for it. And there's there's always like arguments about what this means. My language teacher suspects that it's related to Diliquah, which is our word for rice, which doesn't totally make sense to me, but okay. Like maybe rice was growing there at some point, I don't know. I know people grow rice in Arkansas now, but I don't know if rice has always been hanging out in northeast Oklahoma. The the story that I kind of just gravitate to for sentimental reasons, I guess, is that Talikwa is more related to Tali Ekwa, which Tali is our word for two, and Ekwa is enough. And it's a story about immediately following removal, they say that the trail for the Cherokees ended in Tahlequah, where Tahlequah is now. And it's the site of restoration of the Cherokee Nation. So there's a story that once everybody had made it across and reconnected with people, because there were several waves of removal for our tribe and others, but we had at least 4 different trails we came over on over time, that once the final wave had arrived and people had reconnected with their kin, they sent people to a central spot to meet to figure out where they would set up their new nation capital. And on the day that this was supposed to happen, only 2 people showed up, and they said, well, 2 is enough, we will together choose a location here. So I think of that, when I think of the name of the town, and whenever I'm in Tahlequah and I see like signs in syllabary, and we have Cherokee English signs on businesses and roads and the immersion school and all these things, to me it speaks to the resilience of our nation and like the strength to continue, you know, to connect with those we have and keep pushing forward.
I just want to share a takeaway that I had as someone who's not involved and just a parent visiting. When you were talking about the maps, and I know every single name is about a relationship with the land. And then you mentioned, you told, well, what about Lincoln Woman? I thought, all the names that you go back to, those indigenous names, relationship with land, but the names that you're talking about take us away from the land, or take away the relationship, and then it may be connected to climate. Obviously, if we don't have names that bring us to a relationship with land, the place, you know, whether it's yours is head, we're not going to care about it as much because the name isn't. We're not looking at it that way. We're naming things randomly. We're not naming them because of our relationship or what we see or what we do or what we did there. So that's just my takeaway. I just wanted to share.
No, I agree. Yeah, these students are like, pay attention. You know, that's what they say. They're like, pay attention. We're all pointing to this. Look up. You know,
But if
look
you just
over here.
it's meaningless. It's just a random assignment. It's an assignment to a place, but it's not a relationship to a place.
And there's something too, when you're talking about an activity, there's an implication, maybe, to me, I infer that there's a certain commonality, that these are activities and places that people experience together. Where you put a person's name on it, it becomes very exclusive and individual.
Having verbs, it's a way of doing, and keeps the activity versus taking away that activity. Yeah.
Let's think hard, really.
I think one thing that kind of stood out to me when you were talking was, I think a lot about history and then kind of place, and I feel like Native people have always understood history as an important part of identity and like where they are. And I think about my own nation, our experience with removal and the place that we call it. We usually don't say that word, but everyone who's in the community knows what that word is, and when we use it like sparingly. But we also understand the history of it and our tied experience to that piece of like the land. And I think that even demonstrates for us our way of like understanding location and history in a way that's more complex and really personal, and even something that we don't even share with everybody because it's very like, it's way too close and way too personal. And so I think about even my own nation not wanting to put that place on the map, but everyone knowing it and like knowing exactly what that place is, what the name is. And I think about like the kind of the idea of refusal as an act, kind of as an act of sovereignty, kind of think about Archer Simpson and the whole part, and the idea of refusal as part of that.
Teacher. No, just listening and everything shared. We live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and there's an underswell, a swell. There's a desire to refer to the Grand River, which runs through Grand Rapids, as the Washington, which means swift water. And when I think about what we've been talking about today, and then on the shores of the swift water is DeVos Hall, Van Andel Arena, all these Dutch names, and these people who I'm sure we're probably familiar with the name DeVos and what goes on with our education in this country now. That there's a Washington that runs through there swiftly, sometimes gently, but this time of the year with all the rain. So you have that river just kind of making its way through the middle of Grand Rapids in the midst of all this stayed concrete and clay and all these names attached to it that, bring a lot of ire to this country.
Let's thank Margaret.